Hey, welcome back. Hey, you right there, you are awesome. Hey, for a lot of reasons, but the most important one today is the fact that you opened up this announcement video and that you are here, continue your educational journey. So with that in mind, hey, let's not waste any of your time. Let's get right into it. As you can see, we've got 2 work days this week. We're working Wednesday and Friday. We got Monday off, Martin Luther King Day. So relax, enjoy, celebrate that in the manner that's fitting to you. If you got to get caught up, you got to get caught up. It is what it is. But we got to get from the module 0111 all the way out to 17. So 7 quality modules to get through. So we're going to be introducing some pretty cool topics today, as you can see right there. Little plasma membrane, little osmosis, little diffusion. We're going to introduce them here and then go to the whiteboard and break those down. So let's get to it. The idea of passive transport and what it does for us is absolutely amazing. It allows our cells to be the most efficient, okay, the most productive, and in the most functional way possible as far as homeostasis and keeping everything balanced. The idea of diffusion, getting things into the cell, the resources needed, and the idea of passive transport not requiring any energy. Hey, that's just like Amazon bringing stuff to your house, no shipping required. You get it, and it didn't cost you any extra to get it there, to get it inside your house. Osmosis, moving water, not for the sake of moving water, but for the sake of diluting down concentrations. Incredible for us. It allows our homeostasis, pH levels to remain in place, concentrations in place to where the cell is the most functional and the most beneficial, most efficient way possible. So, hey, let's get to the whiteboard and break this down. I'll meet you there. All right, here we are at the whiteboard. Hey, thank you again for being here. As you can see, and as we mentioned, we're going to be talking about passive transport. Okay, and the idea of passive transport, let me get me a little pen here. I did all this in blue, so we'll go red now just to differentiate. We're going to start our discussion right here. Okay, we're talking passive transport. Okay, when we're talking passive transport, super important for our cells. Okay, a couple of properties, okay, that make that the case. For one, as I mentioned earlier, no energy is required. When these materials move into our cells, hey, it doesn't cost anything. It doesn't cost your cell anything. The resources we make, no energy is required. Hey, it's a win-win. So we move the stuff in, the resources that we need, and the cell doesn't have to spend any of that currency, which is ATP. Hopefully you're familiar with that. If not, as we go through, I'm sure we will discuss that topic. But no energy is required. And the second property, and it's kind of an odd phrase, moves down the concentration gradient. And at first glance, if you don't have any familiarity with those words, you're thinking, okay, I don't even know what that means. Hey, and that's fine, because that's why we're here. So what that means, and now we're down here, okay, this phrase right here, it means that it moves from where it is, okay, to where it is not. And to illustrate that, let's talk about some lemonade. Or you could talk coffee. You could talk anything in which you put a powdery mix into a glass of water to make some cool beverage, to make some cool drink. So when you make lemonade, you get your glass of water and you put the water in there and in the glass, and then you go get your little container that has the powdery mix in it, and you spoon that out or whatever, and you pour that into the water. And when that hits the water for the first time, all that powder is in one spot. Okay, it's all concentrated in one area. But over time, it spreads out from where it is to where it is not. And that is what we mean by moves down the concentration gradient, going from all in one area out to everywhere else. Now, we typically, whether it's tea, lemonade, coffee, whatever, if we're mixing a powdery mix into water, we stir it. And it's just for a time emphasis to speed that process up because, hey, we want to drink. But you don't have to do that. If you waited, okay, that powder would eventually move out into all the areas of the glass and they would be the color that the powdery mix or whatever is going to make the water. Now, it may not be uniform as far as color because you didn't stir it up to mix it up evenly, but it would move out from where it is to where it is not. It's the same process that you can smell cookies baking from the kitchen when you're in another room in the house. In the beginning, all the smells of the baked cookies are in one spot, and over time they spread out to every part of the house that they can reach. Okay, it's also the same reason why that you can smell a skunk from half a mile away. When that skunk sprays for whatever reason, dog startled, predator, maybe even got hit by a car, unfortunately. But then that smell spreads out for a long distance, and you can smell that even though you can't see or you're not anywhere near where the skunk is. That is all diffusion. Passive transport. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Passive transport. The idea of it moving away from where it is out to everywhere else, equally in all directions, as long as it can. Obviously, it's a powdery mix on top of the water. It can't move upwards. Okay, it's not a magician or anything. It's got to move through the medium that it can. So that's passive transport. No energy required. Check. Super important. Move down the concentration gradient. Check. Super important. Now, there are three types, of passive transport. We're going to talk about two of them today. The third one, facilitated diffusion. If need be, in another topic, we'll talk about that, but we're just going to talk about the idea of molecules, non-water molecules moving, and we're going to be talking about the water molecule moving. So we're going to focus on those two things. First, let's talk about diffusion. Okay, diffusion is super important, as I've mentioned a couple of times. Since no energy is required, that means the cell can get all the resources it needs without any cost. How cool is that? Exactly right. So whether it's salts, potassium, water, any of the ions that it might need, all that stuff. Okay, it can get it into the cell free of charge. How can you beat that? Now, there are a couple stipulations, or I shouldn't say a couple. One major one, it's got to be small. Okay, it's got to fit through these little empty spaces as it moves through naturally. And it does so with the idea of kind of balancing out the amounts, the concentration amounts. As you can see here, this is kind of a before, and this is all the way out here and after. So we start out with a bunch out here, none in here, and they slowly start to trickle into the cell. And eventually, we get an equal amount, as you can see here. But what I don't want you to think is that, it stops. Boom. We shut the gate down. No, it continues to go back and forth, some in, some out, but trying to maintain a equal concentration amounts. So that's diffusion. The main thing, it's got to be small. And I don't mean just small like me, short. That's something different. I mean super small molecule. It's got to be able to fit in through the little open spaces of the membrane. So that is diffusion. Our next topic, osmosis. Osmosis is always, whether it's Crowder college bio class that I teach, or at the high school where I teach, I always reference osmosis as being one of the trickier mental topics that we cover, because the definition of osmosis, the net movement of water, that leads students to think that the purpose of studying osmosis is to study just the water moving, and that's not the case at all. It's moving with a purpose, and that's the part that we want to focus on, the purpose that it's moving, not the fact that it is moving. And when I say that, we're going to use this picture over here to illustrate that. Here's a brave fireman, as all firemen are brave. I can't even imagine putting yourself in harm's way like that to to try to save somebody's property or to try to prevent disasters like that. But anyway, my hat's off to him as always. But that's a fireman, and he is using water to help put out a fire. So he's not moving water just for the sake of moving water. He is moving water with a purpose. Okay, he is trying to get a job done with that water. And that's the same thing with osmosis and our cells and our water. We're trying to get a job done. Okay, and the job is to dilute down concentrations amounts. So you can see we're now going to work right here with this. And let's see if we can't. Let me close this pen. Let's blow this thing up a little bit. Oh, I should have been up here. There we go. Blow this thing up a little bit so we can see these speakers really good. So this is, again, I don't have my pen up. This is before, okay, and this is after. Let me finish that B. There we go. Before and after. Okay, the things to recognize is the fact that this red dotted line is supposed to represent a membrane, similar to what your cells have, plasma membrane, and allows the water to go through. But the little dots, the solute, whatever it may be, salt, potassium, oxygen gas, whatever it may be, cannot pass through. So this idea, as you can see, we have some over here, and we have a lot more over here, but the water levels are the same. Okay, but the trick is the concentrations amount wouldn't be the same. This over here, this side, might be even like an 80-20 mix. 80% water, 20% solute. Where over here, it might be, I don't know, 60-40 solute. It might be 60% solution or solute over there and only 40% water. And in your sales eyes, hey, that's not good. Okay, we can't have that. We need an equal concentration. So the water moves into this side, and now you can see, and that's why it increased the water level over here, but now we can see that each side has a 50-50 mix. Concentration amounts. Okay, 50% water, 50% solute, 50% water, 50% solute. And that is the purpose of osmosis. Moving water, not for the sake of moving water, but for the sake of equalizing or making the mixtures, the concentrations amounts, the same. Okay, it wants that balance. Okay, now osmosis has three types. So we're going to move this up here where we can see all of this, and then bring our pen back. This obviously is our red blood cells, and this, in case you don't recognize it, is a plant cell. Now, there are three types of osmosis, as you can see here. Hypertonic, isotonic, hypotonic. Now, hypertonic, and you can see those red blood cells. That looks like a bad situation. Hypertonic is when there's more solute outside of the cell than there is inside the cell. And so the water, because it's trying to dilute down concentrations, moves outside of the cell. Okay, outside of the cell. Okay, and you can see that that is a bad situation. The opposite, hypotonic, now there's more solute concentrations inside the cell than there is outside the cell, and the water tries to move in, or doesn't try to move in, the water moves in and gets the cells all nice and large, which you may think, hey, that's a good thing, right? Nice, big, fat, healthy red blood cells. Well, until they can't get through what they're trying to get through, capillaries and tissues and all that stuff. And if they start to stack up because they can't get through, that's a bad situation right there. And if they get too full, they can also burst, which I don't have to tell you, would be a bad situation. So hypertonic, hypotonic, neither one of those are extremely efficient or beneficial to our cells. We need to be isotonic, right here. Meaning that, and you can see here, that there are equal parts of the water moving into the cell as there are moving out of the cell. In other words, balance, okay, equilibrium. We've reached a good point when we're at that, because that means the concentrations amounts outside the cell are equal to what's inside the cell. So now we're just exchanging water, just moving water still. Okay, it doesn't mean that no water is moving. Okay, it means that it's moving in equal amounts and all is good. Now, plants down here, also, same three phrases, hypertonic, isotonic, hypotonic. Plants have a little different viewpoint on the situation. They certainly don't want hypertonic to when the water leaves the cell because there's more solute concentration outside the cell. Okay, they can live with isotonic when they're equal amounts, but the one they prefer is over here, hypotonic. And you may be thinking, well, why would they want hypotonic when their cells could eventually burst? That, my friend, is the great question. Because of this bad boy right here. Hopefully you understand what this is. Waiting for it. Yeah, it's a cell wall. Okay, if you said cell wall, good job by you. Okay, that's the cell wall, which is a very rigid, tough, durable outer shell for the plant cell. Okay, and it can handle a little bit of pressure. And you can even see it. This cell is kind of like, puffed out a little bit. Not quite Hulk size, but we're getting there. Hypotonic, meaning the vacuole that stores the water is full, and when it gets full and puffs out, it presses or it causes pressure against the cell wall. And when that happens, it acts similar to when we stack up these plant cells to our vertebrae. Our vertebrae is what allows us to stand up in our bones because they're strong, rigid, and they're pointing upward, they're moving upward, or they're pointing upward, and that allows us to stand. Same thing with a plant. Okay, if it's a blade of grass or some fleshy green vegetation, those cell walls having that pressure applied to them because of a full vacuole, and you stack them up, acts just like our bones and our vertebrae do. It allows that plant to stand up with the idea of being upright. And when it starts to lose a little bit of water, that's why it kind of wilts over a little bit. And as soon as you water it, eventually, boom, right back up to standing upright. So they prefer hypotonic. Now you may be saying to yourself, how am I going to remember which is hypertonic, what's hypotonic, all that stuff? Well, have I got a deal for you. Let me close out my ink tray here, and let me move over here. Okay, open up the ink tray again. Now, hypertonic. Okay, now when I was growing up, especially in the summertime, we had an aunt that lived with us, and she lived with us. She was a school teacher, and so in the summer times or Christmas break, that kind of stuff, when it was we weren't in school and she wasn't in school, she would watch us, and my mom would be at work and everything. But especially in the summertime or when it was nice weather, my brother and I, okay, we were way too hyper to be inside. Okay, plus, we were kids a long time ago, different times. So in the summertime, my aunt had this idea, hey, here's what you do with hyperactive kids. You send them outside. Yeah, she'd send us outside. So we would go outside, we'd eat breakfast, and we'd get all our stuff, our baseball bats and all our games and stuff we want to do outside, and she would send us outside. Now, we joked with her that we could actually hear the screen door lock because we weren't coming back in, but that's a whole different topic too. So hypertonic, you send hyper kids outside. The water moves outside the cell. So if you can think of the word hyper connected to the word outside, that will remind you at all times that in a hypertonic solution, the water is going to move outside the cell. Now, you may have seen this in action before. One of the ways that people who garden, and my wife's a gardener, and slugs are the enemy of most of her plants because they get on there and they eat them and stuff, and I don't know, she don't like that kind of stuff. So she gets these little powdery things that is meant to get rid of slugs. And here's the way those powdery things work. When those slugs, you can pour the salt directly on them if you see them, or whatever. But she lays it out, just kind of puts it on the ground or whatever. And as they crawl around, when they come in contact with it, okay, what their cells see is the fact that, the solute concentration is greater outside the cells than it is inside the cells. So the water goes out to try to dilute that down, and therefore that makes the slug lose all the water in the cells, which is a bad situation. Now the opposite, hypotonic, okay, and when I teach this to students, whatever level they are, okay, I focus on that letter O in the middle of hypotonic. And matter of fact, at times we draw it, and we draw it pretty big, almost like this O over here, and we treat it like it's a pond. Okay, it's a pond. If you don't think about ponds out in the open, out in natural, they're typically at the elevation's low point in an area. And when it rains and you have water, all that water runs to the pond. So it runs into the pond to fill it. Okay, so hypotonic, the water goes into the pond, it goes into the pool. Hypotonic, the water goes into the cell. So if you can remember that hypertonic outside, hypotonic fills that pool, fills that O, water moves inside. So hopefully those two metaphorical mental connections can help you to remember which is hypertonic, or what happens in a hypertonic solution with your cells, and what happens in a hypotonic solution. So let me close this. Let me zoom back out. That's too far, because now you get to see other stuff that we've already dealt with. So let's move this back over here, and now we move out in an equal setting. I think we have covered everything. Move this over here. One more little zoom. Yep, I think we've covered everything. So, hey, again, thank you. And with that, we will get back into the rest of our video. Well, as you can see, hey, that's our show for today. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope you got lots of benefit from that. Hope the idea of passive transport, okay, osmosis, diffusion, plasma membrane stuff, that really made sense to you, and you were able to get some good meaning from that. So with that, we will see you on Wednesday. And of course, that was my dog Avery. Mailman must be here. So we will see you on Wednesday.